Good afternoon. Make this brief and we can get to questions. By now all of you are familiar and aware, both the Senate and Assembly have passed, 10-day retroactive extenders to keep state government funded. They were both bare bones, sort of straight extenders, no policy, just making sure that the hardworking men and women who keep New York State running, keep New York State safe, continue to get paid, because unfortunately we're not able to come to a budget on time to fund the government. It's pretty simple why negotiations have failed. I think the Speaker said, that 90%, I think, by his count, was spent on bail. And the reality is the Senate Democrats and Assembly Democrats cannot agree that changes need to be made to cashless bail. I think even they have essentially acknowledged that if they have not said it directly. So even though poll after poll, data point after data point shows that New Yorkers are concerned about public safety, and they believe that cashless bail and other pro-criminal legislation that have been passed here in Albany has contributed to that public safety crisis. My colleagues across the aisle, our colleagues across the aisle, cannot seem to bring themselves to make even the most modest of changes. And I'm sure once they get past bail, there are a host of other issues financially. They have not agreed to table targets. So they have not agreed as to how much more they want to spend and tax New Yorkers, which is going to be, I'm sure, a major point of issue. So we can't agree how much we want to spend in tax, and we can't agree that New Yorkers need to be kept safer than they currently are. And that's why we have a late budget, and that's unfortunate, but that's where we are. My colleague across the aisle, Senator Stewart Cousins, says she was disappointed. However, unlike the governor, she does not cite a specific rationale for her disappointment. As again, the Speaker said 90% of the budget talks have been around bail. And here we are, late. And I guess we're going to have to come back next week, a day after Easter, still in Passover, because the government is only funded, I believe, until the 10th at midnight, which means we will have to come back here and barring, and I know it's Easter and Passover, and that is a time when we celebrate the miracle of the resurrection, but I believe it will take another miracle for us to have a budget next week when we return. I think at this point we can anticipate another extender, and the question then becomes, how long are we going to pass extenders to make sure that the hardworking people get paid here in the state of New York, that work on our roads, our troopers, folks who work in jails, who work in mental health facilities, what have you, folks that work with developmentally disabled, some of our most vulnerable populations. We want to make sure they continue to get paid, but we have got to pass a budget. And if you look at the extender, it's my conference brought this up. It's unfortunate that we couldn't have passed that last week. There's nothing in there that couldn't have been voted on Friday. And we're nowhere further along than we were when we left here on Friday afternoon. So very disappointing. Not a great day for New York State, for our state government, but our conference, and I want to thank Senator Lanza, I want to thank Senator O'Mara for his questions on the floor and the work that he's done as our finance ranker, certainly Senator Griffo, Senator Rhodes, and our entire conference. We're continuing to be ready to do the job they were elected to do, and we stand ready, and we'll certainly come back here whenever we have to do the people's work. But we're not going to just sit here on the taxpayer dime waiting for something to happen, and obviously nothing's going to happen until next week. So with that, be happy to take any questions.
Any concerns about if this goes for another several weeks or so, if school districts and nonprofit entities that kind of rely on understanding what their state aid figures and look like, will they have a harder time budgeting? The school district votes, I know, is about 6 weeks away at this point, so not necessarily
Yeah, right. I think, certainly the school districts, at some point, that becomes, I think, a bigger issue than maybe it is right now. I haven't heard yet from any of my superintendents, but, you move in the next week and the week after, and now suddenly I'm sure some of the districts start to get nervous about what that means for their aid runs, how they have to budget, and certainly not-for-profits and agencies that rely on government funding. Those budgets are, if there's any snag in government funding, if there's any, cut or not, if there's any holdup, that's going to cause a real issue for these organizations. So that's why we did we're doing the extender, obviously, so workers get paid, but also to keep state government funded. But to your point, school districts and they rely on a budget which has a line item for them, and you don't have that right now. And I don't know when you're going to have that. This is for me 8 years, the first time I can ever remember getting to this date with really just absolutely no clarity on a state budget, even a framework, table targets, anything like that. And those are, by the way, those are real issues that there's disagreement on a lot of times too. How much money to spend? Where does the money go? What's the budget? That's almost usually the meat of why we disagree over a budget. We haven't even got to there, if you believe what the speaker and some other folks have said, because they've been talking about bail and public safety issues the entire time. So there is still a lot of work that needs to get done, and I'm sure that's not great solace to the people in the organizations who rely on it.
So I know this question's been asked many sort of gazillion times, but I'm asking again anyway. We were just talking to Speaker Hasty. He said he doesn't think the data shows that bail reform is causing the crime spike, and if there's a perception among the public that it's high, but he doesn't see the data that shows it, and that's where they are stuck.
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe the speaker, we can solve this whole issue. We can, call him up and we can share some of the data that we've seen, that we've shown. What bail has done is not only has it, so I want to back up for a second, Karen, if you don't mind. New Yorkers are concerned about crime. People in New York City, people in Rochester, and we know there's been a spike in violent crime in some cases, particularly, I'll take New York City, the MTA, places like that. So whether you agree with whether bail, cashless bail, or discovery is the root cause for that, I think a lot of New Yorkers would say, and I would say, does that make it better? Are these laws making New Yorkers more safe? Are we helping with the spike in crime? Is it contributing to it? Or is it just adding to the chaos, another log on the fire? So that's where I think a lot of New Yorkers are. They don't view this as certainly helping on the crime issue, if not being a contributor to it. It has also changed the way police report crimes. So, for instance, a lot of times now, if somebody's arrested for the same thing, it's reported as one offense. We've heard this from law enforcement agencies, from district attorneys. We know this to be true. So I think that is also playing into some of these data points, is the fact that it has changed the way police do their job. We have people who would previously, after the third or fourth arrest, in some cases, what you and I might term a violent crime, they would be remanded or held, or bail would have to be posted, and now they get a desk appearance ticket. So I would disagree with the speaker that bail has nothing to do. I know it's convenient to say, it's just a perception. Well, guess what? Perception becomes reality. And the perception here is that we would rather continue to worry about people who break the law than to keep people safe and get a budget done on time. So much so, we're willing to the budget to be late, maybe into May, and all of the ramifications that come along with that. So I think this budget really shows the commitment that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have to criminals and those who break the law.
Do you think the weight would be worth it? Because I know that you support the governor's push on.
Sure.
Do you think it would be worth it to wait if she gets what she wants?
Yeah, well, no, I know what you mean. My concern, Dan, is I guess we'll find out if it's worth it if she actually gets what she's looking for. If she gets some, keep in mind, our conference feels that her proposal was actually modest, but a good step. Certainly would be better from a public safety standpoint. Every police officer I talk to, every judge I talk to feels that would be better. But if she gets some watered-down version of that, or something, then I don't know that it's worth it, right? I mean, at some point, I think in any negotiation, two sides have to make a decision. Okay, am I getting anywhere? And that's certainly a question the governor and her team will have to answer. But if she gets what she wants, now I'll add as a caveat to that, there's a lot of other things that are going to be part of this budget that our conference, I think, is going to have a real hard time with. But I think the question is, if this goes on a month and a half, or several weeks, and there's some clarification, you'll remember last year we made bail changes that the Democrats across the aisle said we're clarifying the law. Now, I don't know who they were clarifying it for, maybe themselves, but they obviously didn't do anything to make it better. So if all we get is a clarification and it takes a month and a late budget and all the things that come along with that, then that would not be worth it, in my opinion. So at this point, it's got to be significant changes to what has, I believe, been a disastrous piece of policy. Oh, Josh, we'll do Josh, then Zach.
Two questions, one on topic,
Okay.
On topic, is there any dialogue with the governor? I remember you in your Berkeley, when I was managing, before. Is there any dialogue right now and on the off topic, any movement on potential litigation?
So as far as dialogue, yes, there has been dialogue. And I appreciate that. I don't know where that will always go, but I think dialogue is certainly important, certainly from my perspective, and I think our conference's perspective, even when we disagree, whether it's the majority in the Senate, whether it's the governor, even internally. I think dialogue is a big part of governing in this process. So there has been dialogue, which I appreciate. As far as the judicial piece, there are continuing conversations about, our options as a conference, about the legislation that was passed, the constitutionality of it. Obviously, we're looking at that. But I also would caution, or at least make a point, that I believe the bill has not yet been delivered to the governor for signing. And that's a piece of this. In other words, that would need to be signed into law, for even a lawsuit to even move forward. So, we're keeping an eye on that and obviously measuring our options, and, we'll make a determination here, I imagine, sooner than later, one way or another.
Just on that, can you tell us a little bit about how recently there's been that?
I mean, it's been, I would say, I had, the governor was kind enough to invite Leader Barkley and I over to the mansion about a month ago. And I would say we have had regular conversations I have had with her and her office through up until this past week. Zach, I'm sorry.
I'll do two questions too.
Sure. See what you started, Josh? See what you started?
So any thoughts on the length of the extender?
Yeah.
A short moment about it, some urgency.
Yeah.
10 with the holidays, doesn't seem like much will be going. Maybe making another extender inevitable. So thoughts on that one, and then I'll mention my second question.
Sure. So the length of the extender sort of caught me a little bit by surprise, only from the standpoint that I just, to your point, I think that you sort of alluded to, I'm not really sure what they anticipate will be, how much progress will be made between now and next week, given that we have, Passover and you have Good Friday and you have Easter Sunday. And I'm not saying that things can't happen, but if I'm being honest, there are certain holidays, there are certain things that we know that people, certainly of faith or just family, that they're going to be probably not as engaged as they might otherwise normally be. And so, you know, it seemed to me that while I thought the extender could have been voted on Friday, I thought maybe they would just go through the session calendar, break there, continue to negotiate. But I mean, just logistically, and those that have covered, even at this point, if you had some major breakthrough, getting 9 bills, you know, closed down, signed off by by every leader in conference, put on the system, briefed, meaning Senate and the Republicans and Democrats, Senate and Assembly, and then you have hours of floor debate. I just realistically don't know, even if we did that next Tuesday, it's going to take you all week into the weekend probably to get that done. The Assembly might need another session just to get it done, right? So I just, I think functionally, it would have made practically. Now, I know why the governor and previous governors do short extenders, because they want to try to, she's going to make it as painful, I suspect, as possible for the legislature. And I don't mean that negatively. It's just that's what governors do, because she wants a budget and she wants them here. And the longer the extender goes, she might think the harder it will be to negotiate a budget. So I look at it as a negotiating tack. Do I want to come back next week? No. Will I? Obviously. You know, we'll come back as we need to. And if we got to sit here through all next week, that's what we got to do. Because the public deserves a budget. But the timing sort of did catch me a little bit by surprise, but it sort of is what it is at this point.
And secondly, Senator Boyleman and David Wecker in the Assembly have been pushing their legislation to legalize cameras in courtrooms, maybe even through the budget process. Is that something Senate Republicans could support?
So, Jack, we have not, I'll be honest, I have not spoken to the members about that issue. You know, I've always had sort of, on one hand, you know, everything else is televised now, so what's the difference? But I do wonder, and I know we have lawyers in our conference, former prosecutors, and we have judges. So I've never been, you know, I didn't make my living in a courtroom. I am certain that we would have members in our conference or in the legislature that might be concerned that it would turn it into more of a circus than maybe it already is, right? So, and again, not right or wrong, but those are two varying viewpoints. But we have not, I'll be honest, that has not been something that we have conferenced. I know why you ask, because there's, it might be more prescient in the near future, but that is not something we have conferenced. I'm certain we will as that legislation advances, and maybe we can have a follow-up on that bill or that topic in the near future, if that works. Thanks, folks. Enjoy your holidays.